Mateo's eyes fluttered open, a wave of panic washing over him. He knew he was in deep trouble. Lying in a hospital bed, the first faces he saw were his parents, their expressions a mix of worry and stern disapproval. He could already hear his father's lecture about his reckless behavior. Thinking fast, he decided to play his only card. He blinked slowly, a look of pure confusion on his face. Who are you?" he asked, his voice weak and raspy. His parents froze, their eyes widening in shock. But before they could say a word, another voice cut through the tense silence. It was Damian, his little uncle, who had been standing quietly in the corner of the room. Damian, who was only a few years older than him. Damian, who always seemed to be there, a steady presence in the chaotic whirlwind of Mateo's life. He stepped forward, his gaze locking with Mateo's. With a perfectly straight face, he said, "I'm your husband." The entire room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. My jaw hit the floor, and I'm pretty sure my mom and father's did too. Husband? Since when? Mateo's fake amnesia plan had just taken a turn he could never have anticipated. His own uncle was claiming to be his husband, right in front of his parents. This was a lie layered on top of a lie, a tangled web that was getting more complicated by the second. Mateo just stared, his mind racing. He was supposed to be the one in control of this charade, but Damian had completely hijacked it. What was his uncle thinking? Was this some kind of rescue mission? A bizarre attempt to save him from his father's wrath? Or was there something else going on? Something Mateo had been completely oblivious to? Damian's expression was unreadable, a calm mask that betrayed nothing. He looked so sure of himself, so convincing, that for a split second, even I started to wonder if it was true. Mateo's parents were speechless, their faces a canvas of disbelief and utter confusion. They looked from their son to their brother, back and forth, as if trying to solve an impossible puzzle. An uncle and a nephew, married. Their son married to their own brother. The scandal was palpable. Mateo had wanted to avoid a lecture, but he had just walked into a full-blown family drama of epic proportions. Damian, meanwhile, didn't waver. He simply moved closer to the bed, his presence commanding and protective. He looked down at Mateo, a hint of something unreadable in his eyes, a promise, a warning. Mateo realized he had two choices: expose Damian's lie and face his father's fury, or play along with this insane story and see where it led. He was trapped in a lie of his own making, a lie that his mysterious little uncle had just made 1,000 times more interesting. For some reason, a part of him was curious to see what would happen next. He was supposed to have amnesia, after all. And his husband was right there, ready to fill in the blanks. Oh well, I'll just go with the flow, Mateo thought. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. It was all so sudden, so overwhelming. This man, Damian, claimed to be his husband, his mate. So, gathering every ounce of courage he had, he decided to play along for now. He wrapped his arms around Damian's waist, burying his face in the man's chest. The scent of pine and crisp winter air enveloped him, a strangely comforting aroma that made him feel safe. He tightened his hug, the warmth from Damian's body seeping into his own. "Huss," husband Mateo mumbled, the word feeling foreign yet strangely right on his tongue. It was a whisper, barely audible, but Damian heard it. A low rumble of contentment vibrated through Damian's chest. Mateo peeked out from the safety of the embrace, his eyes scanning the room. They weren't alone, far from it. The room was filled with people, all of them staring intently at him. Their expressions a mix of curiosity, concern, and something else he couldn't quite decipher. A wave of anxiety washed over him. He pressed himself closer to Damian, seeking refuge. Who are they?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. He looked up at Damian, his eyes wide with questions. Damian's gaze softened, a protective arm settling around Mateo's shoulders, holding him securely. He felt Damian press a gentle kiss to the top of his head, a gesture so tender it made his heart skip a beat. "It's all right, my love," Damian murmured, his voice a soothing balm to Mateo's frayed nerves. "They're our family. We've been so worried about you." Damian turned his attention to the others, his hand never leaving Mateo's shoulder. He gestured towards a kind-looking couple standing near the foot of the bed. They were watching him with tear-filled eyes, the woman holding a handkerchief to her lips. "Mateo," Damian said gently, "these are your parents, Alina and David." Mateo's eyes widened. Mom took a tentative step forward, her hand outstretched. "Oh, my sweet boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He then nodded towards the elegant silver-haired couple seated on a plush sofa. They exuded an air of quiet authority. "And over there," Damian continued, his tone respectful, "are your grandparents, Grandpa Arthur and Grandma Sophia." Grandpa Arthur gave him a warm, reassuring smile, while Grandma Sophia dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief, her expression one of pure relief. Standing near them was a group of people, chatting in hushed tones but keeping a watchful eye on him. Damian indicated them with a sweep of his hand. "And those are your aunts and uncles," he explained. "They all rushed here as soon as they heard you were awake." Mateo looked from one group to another. It was all too much. His head was spinning. He pretending to be dizzy and leaned heavily against Damian. Damian immediately tightened his grip, supporting his full weight. "Easy, easy," Damian soothed, his voice low and calm. "Let's take it slow. One step at a time." He guided Mateo to sit back down on the edge of the bed, never once letting go of him. As the door clicked shut, leaving Mateo alone in the stark white room, his mind raced. The words echoed in his head, a confusing, chaotic mess. He had to think fast. This whole amnesia charade was just a desperate attempt to avoid his father's wrath after his latest screw-up. But it had spiraled into something he could have never imagined. His eyes darted around the room, frantically searching. Where was it? Ah, there. His phone, lying innocently on the bedside table. With trembling fingers, he snatched it up, his thumb flying across the screen to find the one person he could trust. The phone rang once, twice, before a familiar voice answered. "Jason. Jason, you will not believe what just happened." A whisper shouted into the receiver, his voice tight with panic. "Whoa, slow down, dude. You sound like you just saw a ghost. What's up?" Jason's calm voice was a small anchor in Mateo's storm of anxiety. "It's worse than a ghost, Jason. So much worse. You know how I was planning to pretend I have amnesia to get Dad off my back? Yeah, the brilliant plan you came up with after you crashed his favorite car? Don't tell me you chickened out. No, I went through with it. It was working. Dad was buying it, Grandma was crying, everyone was worried. And then Uncle Damian Mateo trailed off, unable to even say the words out loud again. He what? Mateo spit it out. He what? Jason's curiosity was clearly piqued. He said, "He's my husband." The words tumbled out in a rush. "My husband, Jason. He said we got married and I forgot. Can you believe the nerve?" There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line, then a small snort, which quickly erupted into a full-blown, uncontrollable roar of laughter. Jason was laughing so hard Mateo had to pull the phone away from his ear. "It's not funny, Jason. This is a catastrophe," Mateo hissed, his face flushing with a mix of embarrassment and fury. "Oh man," Jason gasped, trying to catch his breath between fits of giggles. "Oh, this is gold. Pure gold. So let me get this straight. You fake amnesia, and your hot super-rich uncle swoops in and claims you as his wife?" "He's not my husband. He's my uncle," Mateo insisted, pacing the small room as much as the IV drip would allow. "What do I do? What do I do? If I say I remember now, Dad will kill me. But if I go along with this, I have to pretend to be married to my own uncle." "Hell, Mateo," Jason finally said, his laughter subsiding into a low chuckle. "You really know how to get yourself into trouble. You're in deep, buddy. Real deep." Meanwhile, out in the hushed hospital corridor, a much more serious conversation was taking place. Grandpa Arthur cornered his youngest son, Damian, his expression stern and disapproving. He pulled him aside, away from the rest of the family who were murmuring worriedly amongst themselves. "Damian, what in the world were you thinking back there?" Arthur's voice was a low, angry rumble. "His husband? Have you lost your mind? That boy is your nephew." Damian stood his ground, his face a mask of calm composure that belied the storm of emotions he'd just unleashed. He met his father's gaze without flinching. "He's not my real nephew, and you know it. We're not related by blood. That's a technicality, and you know it. He has called you uncle his entire life. You watched him grow up?" Arthur retorted, his voice rising slightly. "Yes," Damian said, his own voice dropping, becoming softer, more intense. "I have. I've watched him his entire life." He paused, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable crossing his features, before being locked away again. And I have loved him for just as long. Arthur stared at his son, speechless. The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and undeniable. All the years of Damian's quiet watchfulness, his subtle protectiveness over Mateo, suddenly clicked into place. It wasn't just the affection of an uncle. It was something far deeper, something he had hidden from everyone. Since you were children? Arthur finally managed to ask, his anger deflating into shocked disbelief. Yes, Damian confirmed, his gaze unwavering. Always. This was my chance, Father. Mateo created an opening, a chaos I could use. He needs protection from his own father, and I'm going to give it to him, his husband. He said the last two words with a finality that left no room for argument. Back in the room, Mateo was still on the phone with Jason, completely oblivious to the bombshell Damian had just dropped on his own father. So what are my options, Jay? Option A. I regain my memory, face my father's apocalyptic rage, and probably get shipped off to a military academy in the Arctic. Option B. I play along with this insanity, live as the amnesiac husband of my own uncle. Pray I don't lose my actual mind in the process. Honestly, Option B sounds way more entertaining, Jason quipped. Think about it. You get to live in Damian's mansion, use his credit cards, and you have the perfect excuse for everything. Sorry, I can't remember my PIN, darling husband. Oh, did I buy a sports car? My amnesia must be acting up again. This isn't a joke, Mateo groaned, but he couldn't help but see the twisted logic in Jason's words. Life under Damian's roof would be a world away from his father's strict, suffocating control. But at what cost? His sanity? His dignity? Look, just play along for now, Jason advised, his tone becoming a little more serious. Feel it out. See what Damian's game is. You're in a tricky spot, but you're also in a position of power. You're the one with amnesia, remember? Everyone has to tread carefully around you. Use it. The door handle jiggled, and Mateo's heart leaped into his throat. Someone's coming. I gotta go. He quickly ended the call and shoved the phone under his pillow, schooling his features back into a look of blank confusion just as the door swung open. It was Damian. He walked in carrying a small tray with a glass of water and some medication. He moved with a quiet grace that always seemed to set him apart. His handsome face was unreadable, but his eyes, a deep shade of gray, were fixed on Mateo. How are you feeling? Damian asked, his voice smooth and even. He placed the tray on the bedside table. Confused, Mateo answered honestly, his voice small. My head hurts. That's to be expected, Damian said, sitting on the edge of the chair next to the bed. He didn't seem threatening. In fact, he seemed gentle. It was an unnerving change from the distant, cool uncle Mateo thought he knew. The doctor said you need to rest. We can talk about everything later, when you're feeling stronger. Mateo just nodded, watching Damian warily. He looked for any sign of deception, any hint of the motive behind this crazy plan. But all he saw was a calm, steady presence. You said you're my husband, Mateo asked, testing the word on his tongue. It felt foreign and wrong. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched Damian's lips. Yes, Mateo, I am. He reached out, his hand hovering for a moment before he gently brushed a stray strand of hair from Mateo's forehead. The touch was light, but it sent a jolt through Mateo's entire body. It wasn't the familial touch of an uncle. It was something else entirely, something possessive, and yet incredibly tender. Mateo's breath hitched. Jason's words echoed in his mind. You're in deep, buddy, oh yeah. He was in so deep he couldn't even see the surface anymore. He was trapped in a lie of his own making, a lie that his uncle had now twisted into a gilded cage. And as he looked into Damian's intense, unblinking eyes, a terrifying thought crossed his mind. A part of him, a very small, very confused part, didn't entirely want to escape. The day I was finally discharged from the hospital felt like the first day of a strange, new life. Damian was there, a constant, imposing figure at my side. He didn't take me back to my old apartment. Instead, his sleek black car purred through the city streets, climbing higher and higher until we reached the most exclusive district. We pulled up to a towering glass building that scraped the sky, and a valet rushed to open our doors. The lobby was a study in modern luxury marble floors, soaring ceilings, an abstract art that probably cost more than my entire life savings. Damian's hand rested lightly on the small of my back, guiding me towards a private elevator. The ascent was silent and swift, making my ears pop. When the doors slid open, they revealed not a hallway, but the direct entrance to a breathtaking penthouse. My jaw literally dropped. The space was enormous, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic, godlike view of the entire city. It was the kind of place you see in movies, a testament to staggering wealth. Sunlight streamed in, glinting off polished surfaces and designer furniture. It was beautiful, sterile, and completely intimidating. Damian watched my reaction with a small, unreadable smile playing on his lips. "Welcome home, wife," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the cavernous room. Home? This felt more like a five-star hotel I could never afford. He took my small duffel bag from my hand and set it aside, his movements smooth and assured. "Let me give you the grand tour." He led me through the main living area first, sprawling space with a plush white sofa, a state-of-the-art entertainment system, and a minimalist fireplace. Then he showed me the kitchen, a chef's dream filled with gleaming stainless steel appliances I wouldn't even know how to turn on. There was a dining room with a table long enough to host a state dinner, a home gym that rivaled any professional fitness center, and even a private movie theater. He was a meticulous guide, pointing out details with an air of practiced ease. Then he led me down a long hallway. "This is a guest room," he said, opening a door to a tastefully decorated guest suite. It was lovely, but it felt impersonal, staged. He didn't linger, closing the door softly before leading me to the end of the hall, stopped before a set of grand double doors. "And this," he said, a new note in his voice, "is our room." He pushed the doors open, and I had to physically stop myself from gasping. The master suite was larger than my entire old apartment. A king-size bed dominated the center, flanked by nightstands. One side was neat, with a book and a glass of water. The other side was empty, waiting. A massive walk-in closet was attached, and Damian led me inside. My breath caught in my throat. One side was filled with impeccably tailored suits and expensive-looking casual wear in shades of black, gray, and clearly Damian's, but the other side. The other side was filled with clothes for me, racks of stylish shirts, soft sweaters, perfectly fitted trousers, and even a collection of shoes still in their boxes. It was a complete, brand-new wardrobe, all in my size, yet thought of everything. The sheer effort and expense were staggering. Wow, I thought, a bitter sort of amusement bubbling up inside me. He's really, really devoted to this husband act. He was playing the part of a lifetime, and I was his captive audience. I turned to face him, leaning against a rack of cashmere sweaters that probably cost a fortune. I needed to see how far he would take this charade. I decided to play along, to test the limits of his elaborate lie. I crossed my arms, tilting my head, and offering him a small, questioning smile. "So, husband?" I began, the word feeling foreign and strange on my tongue. "I'm sorry. I know the doctor said my memory is patchy, but I really have forgotten. How did we meet?" I watched his face closely, looking for any flicker of deceit, any crack in his perfect facade. I wanted to see how deep his lies went, how intricate a web he was willing to weave for me. Damian didn't even blink. He met my gaze directly, his own expression softening into something that looked remarkably like fond reminiscence. He walked over to a small seating area in the corner of the closet and gestured for me to join him. I sat, and he took the seat opposite me, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "We grew up together," he said, his voice smooth as silk. "I've known you my whole life." He smiled, a genuine, heart-stopping smile that made my stomach do a little flip. "Actually, I've been in love with you since I was 10 years old." My mind did a quick calculation. If he was 10, that would have made me 6, a 6-year-old. A wave of disbelief washed over me. Damn, this is madness, I thought. He was either the most romantic man alive or completely delusional. He continued his story, his voice weaving a tale so detailed, so filled with emotion that even I almost started to believe it. "I waited, of course," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I watched you grow up, was always there in the background. I finally got up the courage to confess my feelings right after you graduated from university. We were at your favorite spot by the lake, the one with the willow trees." He described the scene so vividly, I could almost picture it. I was so nervous, he chuckled. I thought you were going to say no, but you didn't. A look of pure adoration crossed his face. You said yes. You made me the happiest man in the world that day. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. We're married a year later. Small ceremony. Just our closest family and friends. Just like you wanted. He reached out and gently took my hand, his thumb stroking over my knuckles. His touch was warm, firm, and strangely comforting. The story was insane, a complete fabrication, but the way he told it, he was a master storyteller. And as I sat there listening to this beautiful, impossible lie, a tiny, treacherous part of me almost wished it were true. I'm tired. I want to rest. The words left my lips in a whisper, a stark admission of the exhaustion that seeped into my very bones. What else was there to say? After everything that had happened, after the whirlwind of emotions and the shock that still lingered, words felt useless. Damian looked at me, his expression unreadable for a moment before it softened. Yes, take a shower and then rest. I'll use the shower in the next room, he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. I nodded, grateful for the simple instruction, the momentary reprieve from having to think. The hot water cascaded over me, washing away some of the day's grime, but not the turmoil in my mind. Stepping out, I found a set of soft pajamas laid out on the bed. They were far too big for me, clearly Damian's, but the scent that clung to them, a subtle, reassuring mix of sandalwood and something uniquely him, was strangely comforting. I slipped them on and climbed into the massive bed, the sheets cool against my skin. Sleep. That's all I wanted. I closed my eyes, willing my racing thoughts to quiet down. Just as I was drifting off, the soft click of the door opening startled me back to full awareness. My heart hammered against my ribs. It was Damian. He moved with a quiet confidence, the dim light from the hallway silhouetting his powerful frame before the door closed, plunging the room into near darkness. My breath hitched. I lay perfectly still, pretending to be asleep, every nerve ending tingling with anticipation and a healthy dose of fear. The mattress dipped beside me. My eyes flew open in the dark. Damian was climbing onto the bed. This can't be happening, my mind screamed. He settled beside me, the sheer size of him a palpable presence. Then an arm wrapped around my waist. It was firm, possessive, yet somehow not threatening. He pulled me close, my back pressing flush against his solid chest. So close. I could feel the radiating heat from his body seeping into mine, a stark contrast to the cold dread that had been pooling in my stomach. Every inch of me was electrified. My heart was a drum solo against my ribs, so loud and frantic I was sure the whole world could hear it. Please, I prayed to anyone who might be listening, don't let him hear it. Don't let him know how utterly terrified and flustered I am right now. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to regulate my breathing, trying to calm the wild panic. Then I felt his breath on my skin. Damian buried his face in the crook of my neck, his hair tickling my cheek. A low rumbling sound vibrated through his chest and into my back as he inhaled, long and deep. He was scenting me. The realization sent a shiver down my spine. He was breathing in my pheromones, the sweet freesia scent that marked me as an omega. In this impossibly intimate position, with his warm breath ghosting over my scent gland, I felt a confusing mix of vulnerability and a strange, budding sense of security. His arm tightened around me, holding me as if I were something precious. And in the silent darkness of the room, with the alpha's scent enveloping me, my world tilted on its axis once more. What did he want from me? What was going to happen now? My mind was a chaotic mess of questions, but my body, against all logic, began to relax into his hold. As Mateo's breathing evened out, settling into the deep rhythm of sleep, Damian found himself simply watching him. The soft moonlight filtering through the window painted silver stripes across Mateo's face, highlighting the peaceful curve of his brow and the gentle rise and fall of his chest. An overwhelming wave of affection washed over Damian. He couldn't resist. Leaning in, he pressed a soft, lingering kiss to Mateo's forehead, a silent promise to protect him. His lips then traced a feather-light path downwards, brushing against Mateo's closed eyelids, each one a delicate petal. He kissed the bridge of his nose, then the soft apple of his cheek, savoring the warmth of his skin. Finally, his gaze fell upon Mateo's lips. They were slightly parted, looking so incredibly soft and inviting. Damian hesitated for only a moment, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He leaned down and captured Mateo's mouth with his own. The kiss was tentative at first, just a gentle pressure, soft and careful, afraid of waking him from his slumber. But then, a miracle happened. As if in response to his unspoken plea, Mateo's lips parted further, a silent invitation that sent a jolt of electricity straight through Damian's soul. It was all the encouragement he needed. The dam of his restraint broke, and he poured all his longing, all his pent-up feelings into the kiss. He kissed Mateo as if it were the last time, as if the world might end at any moment, and this was his only salvation. It was no longer gentle. It was a desperate, hungry claiming. And then he felt Mateo's arms wrap around his neck, fingers tangling in his hair, pulling him closer, impossibly closer. He wasn't just accepting the kiss anymore. He was returning it with a fervor that matched Damian's own. Meanwhile, in the hazy world of dreams, Mateo felt a presence. A warmth enveloped him, a sense of rightness settling deep in his bones. He dreamed of a kiss that felt like coming home. It wasn't strange or unwelcome. It was familiar, as if he'd been waiting for it his entire life. It tasted of starlight and safety, of a bond forged long before they ever met. In his dream, he didn't question it. He leaned into it, deepening the kiss, his body instinctively knowing what to do, how to respond to this incredible connection. It was a primal recognition, a soul-deep certainty. This was it. This was the one he was meant for. This was his mate, his alpha. And in the space between sleep and waking, between dream and reality, their souls finally, truly met. Weeks flew by, and life for Mateo and Damian settled into a comfortable rhythm. On the surface, they were just like roommates, sharing a space, a routine, and, well, a bed. But that was as far as it went. Damian never tried anything more than just sleeping next to him, a silent promise of respect that allowed Mateo to finally let his guard down. He started to feel a sense of ease around Damian, a calm he hadn't realized he was missing. Every morning, Mateo would wake up to the delicious smell of breakfast. Damian was always up before him, a quiet presence in the kitchen, preparing their first meal of the day. It became a small, cherished ritual, and it wasn't just the mornings. Damian made it a point to come home early from work every evening. On the rare occasion he had to stay late, his phone would buzz with a message from Damian, letting him know. It felt domestic. Almost like what a husband would do. Mateo would push the thought away as soon as it appeared, but it lingered at the edges of his mind. One day, Mateo had a routine checkup at the hospital. As he sat in the waiting room, Damian, who had insisted on coming along, quietly pulled the doctor aside. He had a special request, one he kept secret from Mateo. He asked the doctor to run a pheromone compatibility test for the two of them. He needed to know. When the results came back, Damian could barely contain his joy. A 99% match. It was almost unheard of, a number that screamed fate, a bond written in their very biology. His heart soared with a hope so bright it was almost blinding. This was it. With each passing day, the invisible thread connecting them grew stronger, weaving itself into the fabric of their daily lives. It was in the shared glances across the dinner table, the easy laughter that filled their apartment, the comfortable silence as they read on the couch. Damian felt it with every fiber of his being. The bond was forming, deepening, becoming an undeniable part of him. He was sure of it. Mateo, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware. Or perhaps he wasn't. Maybe deep down a part of him knew. A part of him felt the shift, the growing connection that was pulling him closer to Damian. But it was easier to live in denial, to pretend it was just friendship, just the comfort of a kind roommate. It was safer that way. But denial is a fragile shield, and with a bond as powerful as theirs, it was only a matter of time before it shattered completely, forcing Mateo to face the truth he was so desperately trying to avoid. The truth that Damian was becoming more than just his roommate, more than just a friend, was becoming his everything. The air at the family gathering was thick with unspoken tension. Mateo and Damian stood side by side, a silent declaration of their bond, but the world around them wasn't ready to celebrate. Mateo's father, a man whose moods could command a room, fixed Damian with a glare that could freeze fire. Every polite word Damian offered was met with a cold, dismissive grunt. Across the room, Mateo's mother watched them, her gaze flitting between her son and the man who so clearly adored him. She saw the way Damian's eyes softened whenever he looked at Mateo, the subtle way he'd lean in, his entire being gravitating towards her son. It was a language of love she understood all too well, even if her husband refused to read it. The inevitable summons came. "Damian, a word in the office." Mateo's father's voice was low, a command, not a request. Damian's own father followed, his expression a mixture of disapproval and resignation. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, sealing the three of them in the study. The confrontation began immediately, a two-pronged attack on Damian's intentions. They questioned his feelings, his motives, his very character. How could he, an uncle, harbor such feelings for his nephew? It was improper, unthinkable. They couldn't believe it, wouldn't accept it. The opposition was a solid wall they expected him to crash against. But Damian had come prepared. He didn't argue or raise his voice. Instead, he calmly reached into his jacket and produced a document. He spread it on the mahogany desk, its crisp, white surface, a stark contrast to the dark wood. It was their compatibility report. The numbers and percentages were undeniable, a scientific testament to a bond that went beyond societal norms. It detailed a level of genetic and biological harmony that was exceptionally rare, a 1 in a million match. The two fathers stared at the paper, their arguments crumbling in the face of cold, hard data. They exchanged a long, heavy look. The disapproval was still there, etched into the lines on their faces, but it was now tinged with a reluctant acceptance. The science was irrefutable. They had no choice but to concede, their agreement hanging in the air like a bitter pill they were forced to swallow. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the sunroom, Mateo's mother found her son. She took his hands in hers, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Mateo, sweetheart," she began softly, her voice full of a mother's concern. "About your condition? Have you started to remember anything?" Mateo looked down at their joined hands, a blush creeping up his neck. He shifted his weight, unable to meet her gaze. "Actually, Mom," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. I was pretending." The confession tumbled out. He explained how terrified he was of his father's wrath after the accident, how faking amnesia seemed like the only way to escape the storm he knew was coming. His mother's expression didn't change. There was no shock, only a deep, knowing sadness in her eyes. "So you know," she stated, not asked. "You know Damian isn't really your husband? That he was lying to you?" Mateo gave a small, sheepish nod, the guilt plain on his face. His mother squeezed his hand. "Then tell me," she continued, her voice still gentle, "how do you feel about him, about Damian?" The question hung between them, simple yet impossibly complex. Mateo fell silent. He looked out the window, at the garden he'd played in as a child, searching for an answer that wasn't there. He thought of all the years he'd known Damian, the man who was always just, his uncle, the fun, dependable figure from his childhood. But then his thoughts shifted to the past few weeks. He remembered Damian's constant, unwavering presence by his bedside, the gentle way he'd spoon-feed him soup, the stories he'd read aloud until Mateo fell asleep, the look of pure relief on his face when Mateo's eyes first fluttered open. He remembered the warmth of Damian's hand, the steady rhythm of his breathing as he slept in the chair next to his bed, the quiet sacrifices made without a single complaint. The lines were blurring. The familiar image of Uncle was being replaced by something new, something confusing and powerful. "I don't know, Mom," Mateo finally admitted, his voice thick with confusion. "I really don't know. He's my uncle. I've always seen him as my uncle, nothing more. But these days, when he looks at me, when he's near me, I don't know what to think anymore." His heart was a battlefield of duty versus desire, of history versus a bewildering new reality. He felt a strange flutter in his chest whenever Damian was close, a feeling he couldn't name but was beginning to crave. The lie had been a cage, but now that he was admitting the truth, he felt even more trapped, caught in a web of his own emerging feelings. He looked at his mother, his eyes pleading for an answer she couldn't give. The path forward was his to walk, and for the first time he was afraid of where it might lead. Mateo's mother gently patted his hand, her touch a small anchor in the storm of his thoughts. "Maybe you should talk to Damian about everything," she said softly. "Then you can decide where to start." Mateo simply nodded, his mind a whirlwind. As he turned, he saw Damian stepping out of the office. A bright, unguarded smile on his face, a look so full of happiness it almost took Mateo's breath away. What had they talked about? What did Damian now know? The questions piled up, but for now, seeing that smile was enough. A comfortable silence settled between them as they walked through the quiet, moonlit garden. The air was cool, scented with night-blooming jasmine. Mateo was lost in his own world, replaying the day's events when Damian suddenly stopped. Before Mateo could react, Damian had turned, gently but firmly guiding him into a shadowed alcove, hidden from the main path by a thick wall of ivy. The sudden proximity made Mateo's heart hammer against his ribs. Damian's presence was overwhelming, his scent, a mix of sandalwood and something uniquely him, filling the small space. He leaned in close, his voice a low, intimate murmur that sent a shiver down Mateo's spine. "Can I kiss you?" The question hung in the air between them, simple yet loaded with a world of meaning. Mateo was completely speechless. His mind went blank, all the worries and rehearsed conversations vanishing into thin air. He could only stare up at Damian, his eyes wide with shock, his lips slightly parted. Damian's gaze was intense, searching his face for any sign of refusal. "Take it as a yes, if you don't say anything," Damian continued, his voice even softer now, a husky promise that made Mateo's knees feel weak. And then he leaned in. The first touch was just a peck, a soft, tentative press of his lips against Mateo's. It was questioning, gentle, giving Mateo every opportunity to pull away, to say no. But Mateo didn't move. He couldn't. He was frozen, not by fear, but by a powerful, surging wave of anticipation. Seeing no resistance, Damian continued. The kiss started soft, a slow, tender exploration. It was a stark contrast to the alpha's usually commanding presence. This was different. This was careful. Then the kiss began to deepen, becoming more confident, more demanding. It was as if Damian was tasting every part of him, learning the shape of his lips, the feel of his skin. Without conscious thought, Mateo's hands lifted, his fingers tangling in the soft hair at the nape of Damian's neck. He pulled him closer, an unspoken invitation to deepen the kiss even further. All the tension, all the uncertainty that had coiled inside him for weeks, began to melt away under the heat of Damian's mouth. They kissed for what felt like an eternity, lost in their own world, the sounds of the garden fading into a distant hum. Finally, lungs burning, Mateo had to pull away, gasping for air. His head was spinning, his lips tingling and swollen. Damian didn't move far. His hand came up to gently trace the outline of Mateo's lips with his thumb, his eyes dark with the desire that made Mateo's breath catch all over again. Then he leaned in and kissed him once more, just as intensely as before. His other hand found Mateo's waist, sliding around to the small of his back, pulling their bodies flush together. Mateo could feel the solid strength of Damian's chest against his own. The world narrowed to this single point, this single person. Just as the kiss threatened to consume him completely, Mateo managed to whisper, "Let's go home." A low rumble of contentment vibrated through Damian's chest, a sound that felt both possessive and deeply satisfied. He didn't stop kissing him right away, but the pressure softened, the pace slowed, until finally he pulled back, resting his forehead against Mateo's. The drive home felt impossibly short. The charged silence in the car was thick with unspoken promises. Damian's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, a clear sign of his restraint. He couldn't hold on for any longer. The moment the car was parked, he turned, and they were kissing again, urgent and hungry in the confines of the parking garage. The kiss continued in the elevator, a frantic, breathless tangle of limbs and lips as the floors ticked by. They fumbled at the apartment door, their mouths never parting, as Damian struggled to find the key and unlock it. The second the door swung open, Damian swept Mateo off his feet. Mateo's legs instinctively wrapped around Damian's waist, pulling him impossibly closer as their kiss deepened yet again. Damian kicked the door shut behind them, plunging them into the familiar darkness of the apartment. Everything became a blur of sensation. The rough texture of Damian's jacket against his skin, the cool air on his back as his shirt was somehow removed. He didn't notice when or how Damian managed to shed his own clothes, or how they ended up in the bedroom. All he knew was the feeling of Damian's lips, his hands, his body. It was a night of pure passion, a culmination of all the longing and unspoken feelings that had been building between them for so long. Every touch was a discovery, every kiss a confirmation. They were finally home, together. "You know," Mateo began, his voice barely a whisper as he lay beside Damian, "I was lying about losing my memory." Damian didn't even flinch. A slow, knowing smile spread across his face. "I know." Mateo's eyes shot open, pushed himself up, propping himself on his elbow to get a better look at Damian. "You know, you knew all along?" The shock was evident in his voice. "Then why? Why did you go along with it? Why did you tell everyone you were my husband that day at the hospital?" Damian chuckled, the sound warm and rich. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the line of Mateo's jaw. "Because it was my chance," he said, his gaze intense and full of a love that was almost overwhelming. "It was my one perfect opportunity to claim you, right there in front of both our families. With your supposed amnesia, they couldn't rush us, they couldn't interfere. They had to let me take care of you." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I couldn't risk losing you, Mateo. Not again." Damian sealed his words with a light, tender kiss on Mateo's lips, a promise and a declaration all in one. Mateo's heart fluttered, a mix of relief and adoration washing over him, settled back down, his head finding its familiar place on Damian's chest. So, that day, at the family gathering, he started a new question forming in his mind. What did you, my father, and grandfather talk about in the study? It all seemed so serious. Damian's smile returned, this time with a hint of smug triumph. "Ah, that." He shifted slightly and reached into the pocket of his trousers, pulling out a folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded it and held it up for Mateo to see. "I had this done the last time you were at the hospital for a checkup." Mateo's eyes scanned the document. It was an official-looking report, filled with medical jargon and data points. But one number stood out, printed in bold at the bottom of the page. His eyes widened in disbelief. 99%. "Compatibility?" breathed, his voice filled with awe. "Wow." "Exactly," Damian said, his grin widening. "I showed this to your father and to mine. I laid it on the table right between them." He paused, letting the memory sink in. They were speechless. After all their plotting and planning, after all their attempts to keep us apart, they couldn't argue with science. They couldn't say a single word against a 99% match. He wrapped his arm more tightly around Mateo, pulling him close. It was checkmate. From that moment on, you were officially, undeniably mine. Mateo laughed, a bright, happy sound that filled the room. He snuggled closer to Damian, feeling a profound sense of peace and belonging. Everything had fallen into place, just as it was always meant to.